Now, Matthew has many parallel texts with what are called the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and you'll see those commonalities as you read those. And there's even some commonality with the book of John, which is very different. But Matthew's infancy narrative is unique to him. It revolves around Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus. Now, Luke does have an infancy narrative, but it's very different, and it revolves around Mary and the shepherds in the field. John, if you want to call it an infancy narrative, does have something, but it's more about Jesus' eternality as the Word. In terms of what takes place with Joseph and then also the Magi from the East, that's unique, that's distinctive to Matthew's Gospel. What's also unique to Matthew is the way in which he incorporates Old Testament passages to talk about Jesus' birth and the nature of the Messiah coming. So there are 5 Old Testament prophecies that he keys off of from the Old Testament and brings them into the narrative. The first of those is probably the most famous, Isaiah 7:14, speaking about how the Messiah will come from a virgin who will conceive. The second is in Micah 5:2. There's a statement about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. And it's interesting the way that this is framed in Matthew's Gospel, because King Herod finds out that there's this Messiah, this king that might compete with him. So he gathers his consultants, his Jewish consultants, and they tell him, yeah, there will be a Messiah and he'll be born in Bethlehem. And that leads to some of King Herod's neurotic behavior. There's a third prophecy as well that Matthew draws from. It's in Hosea 11, verse 1, where Hosea writes, "Out of Egypt I will call my son." And we have some typology at work here because Jesus is now being presented as a true and better son, better than the nation of Israel. In fact, a more definitive son of God is his identity. It's interesting, too, as we think about the rest of the New Testament, how Jesus actually draws sons unto himself, his little brothers, you might call them, and sisters, who are now called the sons of God through their faith in Jesus. The fourth prophecy that Matthew uses concerning Jesus is Jeremiah 31, verse 15, where there's Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel, one of the famous matriarchs of the Jewish people, she's weeping, and there's a correlation here with what takes place when Herod goes and tries to destroy all of the babies in Bethlehem, trying to find that Messiah. Now, God in his providence actually made a way for Jesus to be removed, and he went to Egypt and then went to Nazareth. That's the nature of that Hosea 11:1 prophecy. Jesus came out of Egypt just like the Israelites did in the Old Testament. And so Jesus was able to avoid this great slaughter of children, but still there's weeping and there's sadness in light of what takes place because of King Herod's actions. And that's what that Jeremiah 31:15 passage prophesies. And then there's one final prophecy. There's a statement at the end of Matthew 2 in the last verse where it says, "And he went and lived in the city of Nazareth." So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he went to Egypt, and then they returned to the area of Nazareth. That, what was spoken by the prophets, says Matthew, might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. Now, this is an interesting statement to kind of capstone all that Matthew has already said. And scholars have wrestled for centuries trying to ascertain what Matthew meant here. And it's unclear what Old Testament passage he has in mind when he talks about the future Messiah being called a Nazarene. Well, there's two options. This is either an indirect reference to Samson, because Samson was called a Nazarite in Judges 13, verse 5, and there's some linguistic connections between the Nazarene statements about Samson and then Jesus. So is Jesus a type of true and better Samson, a true and better judge? Maybe. Or this is a reference to the Netzer in Hebrew, the branch of Isaiah 11, verse 1. Isaiah says that there is a branch that will come forth from the root of Jesse. And so using a little bit of wordplay here, Matthew now links Jesus to Isaiah 11:1. Either way, what Matthew is doing with all of these prophecies is he's telling you that this is that. This prophecy, or those prophecies in the Old Testament, are pointing forward now to this Jesus Christ, the one that the Jews have been waiting centuries for. And he's saying definitively, Messiah has come. And implicitly, Matthew is saying to Jews and Gentiles both, put your faith in this Jesus, the promised one, the one who was told about in the Old Testament and now is here, the Savior of the world.